Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're diving into survival horror yet again with a new entry in a franchise with a widely uneven quality, Silent Hill F. As part of the initial broadcast from Konami, assuring us that Silent Hill as a franchise was still very much alive, Silent Hill F had a trailer that offered a lot of intrigue, plus a new twist on a typically western set survival horror. This brings us to the game itself, set in Japan in the 1960s in the small town of Ebisugaoka. This setting has a lot of rich Japanese history to work with, alongside a lot of controversial topics to cover, which is compounded on even more by the decision for the protagonist to be a schoolgirl by the name of Hinako. With the same level of blood, gore and mature themes you'd expect from the franchise, developer Neobards Entertainment, I think, managed to nail the feeling of a Silent Hill game, whilst also broadening the horizons for the franchise as it gives us a brand new setting with a brand new form of horror. Again, we have old deities, horrific abominations and people getting murdered, all the franchise staples, and when one day a mysterious fog rolls into town, we know that bad things are about to happen. This gameplay was captured on my high-end PC, and with it being an Unreal 5 game, of course I had some framerate issues that I had to tinker with the graphic settings to fix. My understanding is consoles are a lot more stable in terms of performance, so check your machine specs before buying. Now without further delay, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and let's step into the fog together to see if we can figure out the mysteries for Ebisugaoka and Hinako herself. Silent Hill F starts very slowly, giving you a character building moment before sending you out into the grey town. You spend a long time walking around and getting a feel for the area and how miserable the place is through Hinako's eyes before she meets up with her friends. As usual in every Silent Hill game, all of the side characters are very esoteric and floaty, very cryptic in whatever they say as to stretch out the mystery of what's actually going on, and I'll admit, this game had me hooked from the outset in terms of the story, and why Hinako was at the centre of it. You do have to suspend some disbelief in spots, as people say things and Hinako makes absolutely no effort to try and get answers out of them, but I feel like this does fit in service to the story.
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to!
Silent Hill F can be easily broken down into two main parts, puzzles and combat. As is typical of the good Silent Hill games, you get a choice of difficulty for both these facets of the game. Story, hard and lost in fog, which is the most difficult. So let's start with the better of the two in the game, the puzzles. I went for the hard difficulty for the puzzles as this was the suggested level, and honestly I'm glad I did. Most if not all of the puzzles had me thinking for a second, which is rare in these types of games. I appreciated not being led at all and having to genuinely think for myself, and often these puzzles were tied into something macabre or a character backstory or motivation which just added to the cerebral nature of the series. In some cases you were given puzzles under pressure as well, where you have to inspect something whilst a weeping angel style enemy draws near, or you have to figure out how to open a door whilst dodging and sneaking around enemies. Next let's cover the most hit and miss part for me, the combat. Before release a lot of people were worried when Neobards was stating in interviews that the combat in Silent Hill F was going to be inspired by action RPGs like Dark Souls, and upon release you can definitely see the influence here as there was a heavy emphasis not only on combat, but learning patterns, dodging and attacking, especially with bosses. To preface all of this, I'd like to point out that for once, I didn't go with the recommended difficulty of story for combat, but opted for the hard option. I know looking back on this now, this was a mistake, especially when it came to the bosses, but having asked around in various forums and discords, the general consensus is that the combat on story mode was really easy and prompted a lot of people to want a bit more challenge. On the other hand for me, let me tell you about the misery I suffered, truly emblematic of Silent Hill. Hinako is a teenage girl, and as such forcing you to do melee combat for the whole game is kind of expected to be janky and awkward. Given the time period, there's no way she would have had access to a firearm, and the melee attacks tend to be awkward and slow. I'm a fan of janky combat. If anything, it kind of belongs in a Silent Hill game. The way it works is your typical action RPG controls, with a light attack and a heavy attack on the shoulder buttons, then a dodge. What is a bit weird and feels out of place is the fact that the dodge is almost superhuman, making Hinako not only cover immense ground at the press of a button, but can also be done at the right time to perform a perfect dodge, refilling her stamina bar and briefly slowing down time. On top of this, you have a counter move, whereby if the enemy flashes red and you quickly perform a heavy attack, you'll cancel out their attack and do a ton of damage. The problem here is that whether you can counter is actually inconsistent. I'm not sure if it's a bug or intentional design, but you can usually counter certain moves for each enemy, to the point where you'll look for that attack to come out, then for some reason about 10% of the time, it just won't flash red, causing you to take damage. Because the counter is dependent on a heavy attack, you can time it perfectly, but if the enemy doesn't flash red for whatever reason, you're locked into a very slow animation and you will take heavy damage. The inconsistency of it feels awkwardly punishing, as if there's no way to escape in time and it's random whether it doesn't flash red or not. Hinako also has the ability to focus, wherein she uses her sanity meter, something I'll get to in a second, to charge up a power move. During this window, counters are easier to do, and when hitting a light attack after a charge, you'll usually stun the enemy. It feels odd to have this weak schoolgirl ducking and weaving like she's some sort of anime protagonist when she's meant to be so underpowered. This is even more so the case when it takes upwards of 6 hits per enemy to take them down, whilst you can get a game over in 3. Typically you'd say avoid the combat. Because it's a survival horror, the combat should be optional, and you're absolutely right, up until the back half of the game. What starts out as a tense way to navigate the town, hiding from enemies and running to keep away from them, turns into forced arenas, where you simply have to fight in order to progress.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
This oppressive combat is then doubled down on by the fact you have weapon durability in this game, meaning if you engage too much in the combat in the real world, you'll end up not being able to fight back at all. In this game's version of the other world, the Dark Shrine, weapons have infinite durability, meaning there's an even heavier emphasis on combat. This is offset somewhat later in the game by a method I'll not spoil, but by the end of the game, the last thing you want to do is fight another bladed doll enemy. This is another thing that I do understand, but also struggle with in Silent Hill F, and that's the lack of enemy variety. I fully understand that enemies in this game, and usually the franchise as a whole, are representative of the protagonist's fears and regrets, and this definitely is the case here. Each monster is finely crafted, with significant details to them that serve the plot and the character of Hinako, bolstered by the journal entries that she makes of them throughout the game. The problem with this is that with such heavy emphasis on combat, this handful of monsters are used a lot, and as such they lose the inherent horror aspect. When you've fought something 20 times already, it just doesn't have the same scare factor.
So is this where I'm supposed to beg for my life? Please, Mr. Killer, don't kill me.
I think this problem is solved by reducing enemy encounters, or by introducing a handful of more enemy types. This is another thing that contributed to the combat in a negative way. Having talked about the core combat and the enemies, let's run through the different systems behind the weakest part of the game. I mentioned the sanity meter earlier as being used to fill a focus meter, but that's not all this resource is for. Essentially it acts as a type of armor Hinako has to protect her from the messed up stuff in Ebisugaoka, which of course you can sacrifice for powerful combat moves. You'll find that certain attacks, especially grab attacks, cause you to lose sanity when they hit you, and once this sanity meter is depleted, any and all damage of this type will go straight to Hinako's health bar. What is an interesting system is that to restore your sanity, you need to invest faith. Faith is essentially like an XP you'll get throughout the game by trading in various items at the shrines you can find throughout the story. These shrines are essentially just save points, but they can be interacted with in a few ways. You can trade your faith to restore sanity, as I said before, you can use items to upgrade Hinako's core stats, and you can also use your faith to draw random Omamori talismans, which you can equip for combat buffs. How you get this faith currency is a great system that I think more survival horror titles should use. Essentially, as you'd expect throughout a survival horror game, you'll find various healing, stamina, and sanity restoring items throughout the world. These items can naturally be used to help you, but you can trade these for faith at the shrine, meaning you have to weigh up if it's worth upgrading yourself now at the risk of less healing later, or trading in a stamina item so you can restore your sanity. This makes decisions very difficult, especially late game when the cost of upgrades gets quite high, so you're really sweating to make the decisions. You can also find items solely dedicated to being offered at the shrine, so it's not always a game of sacrificing your resources. The Omomoris I mentioned earlier are drawn in a gacha style, meaning it's random what you actually get. These can be equipped at any time from the equipment menu, and you can end up with multiple slots following some upgrades. With these you can offset some of the combat woes, but some are pretty hidden or can end up expensive to buy, so you can't rely on them solely to get you out of trouble. The last thing I'll mention here is the music composed by Kensuke Inage and Akira Yamaoka, the composer for the original run of Silent Hill games, and it shows. Here is the perfect blend of slightly surreal Silent Hill music with its floaty nature and the Japanese setting, making for a perfectly unsettled experience and adds to the overall mysterious vibe. The combat music in particular feels like something completely alien with traditional Japanese undertones, and it fits perfectly. There's also the static sound which occurs near enemies that, rather than coming from a radio, just seems to come from the world itself. The sound design as a whole is just perfectly on point here. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? I completed one playthrough of the game, taking my time and trying to find everything I could in the world, and I finished the game on 9.5 hours playtime. If you stand and fight every encounter on your first playthrough, you're likely looking at around the same time as me at 9.5 hours. If you're going for completion, obtaining all 5 endings and fully understanding the story of the game, finding all collectibles too, you're looking at 30 hours, depending on how much you run past on your extra playthroughs. In terms of achievements, Silent Hill F actually has some interesting ones, having you beat certain encounters or bosses under unique criteria, often not being hit. There's also achievements for finishing the game with the difficulty for puzzles and combat set to the 3 difficulty types. I dread to think how miserable a Lost in Fog combat difficulty is though. When it comes to both value for money and respecting your time, this is a hard game to truly recommend. On the one hand, there's a regular autosave and plenty of shrines to stop off at, so you're never going to lose too much in the way of progress if you have to drop the game. It's definitely a game made for longer play sessions because of how narrative and vibes heavy it is, but you may not have an hour or more at a time to dedicate to it. The game's so hard to say it's worth your time because of the level of investment you need to fully appreciate the story. Silent Hill F has 4 regular endings and 1 joke ending. The first playthrough of the game can only result in ending 1, meaning to get the quote-unquote true ending, you'll need to finish the game another 2 times. This is because to get ending 4, you need to have unlocked either ending 2 or ending 3.
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably.
Trust me when I say that from a narrative sense, this does work, and each playthrough of the game changes key cutscenes and even has a completely new final boss to go with each ending, which all seems like something out of Dark Souls rather than Silent Hill, but they do make for engaging encounters. The problem is, when you're looking at an extra 5 to 7 hours per playthrough for what is essentially some new cutscenes and a new boss, it's hard to say it's worth it, especially when you have the very bland and annoying combat you're forced to deal with during this time. This was definitely a tough one to gauge, but ultimately I do recommend Silent Hill F on a sale or a less busy gaming release schedule. The game itself reminds me of one of those hidden gem Xbox 360 games where the story is great but the gameplay just doesn't match it. The atmosphere, music, story intrigue and graphics are enough to carry the game past its janky combat-filled gameplay to deliver a really immersive experience, but I couldn't say wholeheartedly that this game is worth £70 or $70, especially if you only play through the game one time. Yes, the combat is either painful on hard or boring on story mode, but the story and world far outpace the poor combat and helps you overlook its shortcomings. In my opinion, this is one of the best stories in a horror game in a long time, and the eventual narrative that unfolds across repeat playthroughs is masterful. I just wish the core gameplay loop was good enough to actually make me want to play it through that many times. Unfortunately, I fell off, but I have a feeling I'll be revisiting it in the future when the game release schedule dies down a bit. Neobards nails the feel of a survival horror game. No, a Silent Hill game, as it layers its narrative throughout multiple playthroughs with hidden meaning behind every note and enemy design. Introducing some new concepts such as the faith mechanic is a great thing to see, and I hope to get future projects in the franchise to build upon this. Do you have time for Silent Hill F? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game alongside an in-depth look at the time you have to invest, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you want to see more reviews, deep dives and topical videos, subscribe to the channel and drop any suggestions for future videos down in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.